All right, everyone, welcome to Behendigkeit podcast, episode 7. My name is Gereon, and I'm with Pauline today, and we're coming straight to you from Berlin, Germany.
Good to be back. Hi, everyone.
All right, so today we have a very special book that we're going to talk about, and actually we're going to just talk about a couple of parts of it, because honestly, it's so dense, it's so good that we will probably take a long time just to get through the first couple of chapters. And I'm talking about the book. I'm going to hold it up in the German version first, and it's called Projekt Lightspeed, Projekt Lightspeed. Yeah, the English version, and the author is actually English, I believe, is called The Vaccine. But I actually prefer the title Projekt Lightspeed because it's about the two founders of the company BioNtech who invented and produced the BioNtech vaccine, the COVID vaccine that Americans know as the Pfizer vaccine because they had a partnership. But it's not so much about the vaccine in my mind. It's about the business. It's about the people. It's about their mentality. And it's an incredible book. These are incredible people. And yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about their story. And what I really like about it is that they are from Germany. And I think they exhibit the best Germany has to offer. They are both professors. They are both entrepreneurs. They are actually family. They're married to each other. They have a child, right? They're not some hermit who is closed off to the rest of the world, can barely speak to anyone, doesn't have a family, and so on. So they basically have it all, and I think they are very impressive. And so we're going to go through a couple of noteworthy items about them. All right, so the first thing I have to say is I'm a big fan of BioNtech for a couple of reasons, and like almost everything is great about them. So first of all, those two, husband and wife, both professors, both doctors, both researchers. There's so many funny stories about them and like very quirky stuff, very nerdy stuff, and it just makes you smile reading about it, right? So even before reading the book, I've heard that when they got married, after their wedding ceremony, they actually went back to the lab the same day. And I mean, think about the dedication and how crazy you have to be to marry, and on your day of getting married, you're going back to the lab. Really crazy. Another thing that I really like, and there's actually so many tiny little things that I like about them, is that their address, their corporate address, it's, I'm going to say it in German, an der Goldgrube 10. And so basically in English it means number 10 gold mine, right? And this is kind of funny, right? Because now we know that they were very successful and they made billions in sales with the COVID vaccine. But it actually didn't look like that when they started on this venture to create this vaccine. And it's just funny to have this kind of street name. It's kind of weird because usually in Germany the names are a little bit more sober, but I think it's really funny. And the other thing is that what I really like is that we at Teamflow have something in common with them, and that is that we both have an office, a base in Rwanda, Africa, right? And this is kind of special. A lot of people don't really know about Rwanda that much. They sometimes have heard of the genocide that occurred 30 years ago, but they don't really have a picture of it. And we know Rwanda a little bit better. We have an office there. We have employees there. And we actually got to love it because it's a very cool country. They are trying to be the Singapore of Africa. It's extremely safe there. It's extremely clean there. So, you know, if you think of East Africa, you probably wouldn't think that it's actually much safer there for a woman to walk there at night than most parts of Germany, right? Especially in large cities.
Especially in Berlin.
So can you guys tell that I'm from Berlin and she isn't? And okay, I'm going to let that slide for now. But I'm sure we're going to come back to it. But it's actually true, right? So Kigali, the capital city, is safer than Berlin. I think that's fair to say. Of course, there's like always differences on which part of Berlin you're talking about, but it's extremely safe. And it's also extremely clean to a degree that most people probably can't imagine. So Berlin is a pretty dirty city. I love it, but it's dirty. Let's be fair. And in Kigali, I'm not exaggerating. You can basically eat off the street. Everything is just clean, 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 clean. There's a policeman or like a soldier on every street corner, right? And so it's a very interesting place to be. It's growing like crazy. They have a good they have low corruption there. Everything is very stable, safe. People are educated. Everybody speaks English. And if they sometimes, if you find somebody who doesn't speak English well, then at least they speak French, right? And so it's a very interesting place to be, and we're happy to be there. And, well, BioNtech is there too, right? And this for us validates being in Rwanda, but that also shows how forward-looking they are. They know what's going on in the world. They know where to go next. And so this is something we have in common with them, and which I, of course, love quite a bit. So I have to say the book, and it was written by, by Joe Miller. I have to say this book is really expertly written, right? Even if you don't like the topic, don't like the two founders of BioNtech, you just have to say that this Joe Miller guy is an expert writer. He explains the medical concepts extremely well. We're not going to touch on them at all in this podcast because we're more focused on the business side and on the, like how to think and how to be successful stuff. But I have to say, if you want to read a good business biography that is really easy to read, that has a good flow, that's interesting despite the difficulty of the topic, you should really go with it. And so I'm just going to jump from point to point and just talk about some noteworthy things. And one thing I want to notice is the author's note. So in the very beginning of the book, he says that they have actually changed some names of places and identifying features because there were requests of security services charged with protecting BioNtech and its suppliers from ongoing threats. And so I just want to highlight this because we've been talking about Tesla in past podcasts, and I think this is really important to know, is that it's a bit ominous, but if you're doing something really successful, if you get rich doing so, if you're doing something that is controversial, if you're doing something that is valuable to hostile governments, you are probably going to be at some kind of risk, right? And it was well known when they started to show the first successes that actually the BND, the German security agency, intelligence agency, had to protect the company because, of course, other countries were trying to steal their intellectual knowledge, right? And I find this, on one hand, it's not a big surprise, but on the other hand, I still find it very shocking because these guys are doctors that are trying to find a solution for a pandemic and are beset by this security threat, right? And this is especially pertinent because these guys, they still ride their bike to work, right? That's what I meant with the nerdy stuff, right? So they're billionaires, right? And they ride their bike to work. And if they take a driver, it's always the same taxi driver that knows them and who's quite old and who's been with them from the first day, right? And this is what I mean. You can really feel how humane they are. They're not some people whose success went to their head, even though they have every right to do so because they're successful entrepreneurs, they're successful researchers. And they have made it in Germany. They have worked their way up to the elite of the country, and they have every right to be proud of themselves and even be a bit cocky, but they're not, which makes them even more likable.
Yeah, that's a fair point. They're super humble, but it's also they always said they're not doing it for the money at all. They really want to do something good for the people. They want to help them. They want to find solutions. They want to, that was their goal in life. They really wanted to, invent something for defending, doing something against the diseases. And that's, I think, still in their head. It doesn't matter how much money they made and how successful they are now, but they're humble and they never lost their real focus.
Yeah. And I love that you say that because this is actually what Behendigkeit is about, right? It's about some form of agility, business agility, how to be successful and so on. But if you think back a couple of episodes when we talked about Tesla, what did we say? Well, he could have taken out money quite early, and he actually invested his own money into the company, right? He didn't have to do that. He was already a millionaire because Elon Musk had shares in PayPal when it was acquired by eBay, right? And he didn't have to do all this stuff. He doesn't he doesn't need to be yelled at on Twitter and in the media like all day long and get into trouble. And of course, he's getting the trouble with the intelligence agencies of other countries. I think the pressure that he is under, I don't want to defend some of his outbursts, but I think people underestimate the pressure that the guy is under. It's just incredible and almost unimaginable to mere mortals. But he reinvested the money. First, build an expensive car, then build a cheaper car, lower the prices, build out the energy system, right? Take it step by step. And at any point of time, he could have said, I'm stopping, taking the money out, I'm done with this, right? And he's not doing that. I'm really thankful for that, because what would happen if you just said, maybe he did the Bezos, the founder of Amazon, right? At some point of time, okay, it's enough. I'm going on my yacht. I'm lifting weights, remarrying, right? And I'm done with it. But he's not doing that. He's still in the grind, even though he really doesn't need to be.
Yeah, I think that's because of like he fulfilled his dream or his vision, but after this, the next vision is coming, So he knows there is so much more to do, like in Tesla, Elon Musk, whatever. But also like those guys, they see, okay, we did something great. We invented a vaccine, but there's so many more diseases in the world. So why should we stop? And that's exactly the point. They're humble, and they know, okay, we can do much more good for the world, much more good for the people, whatever. So that's a good entrepreneur. Like they achieve their goals, but they know there's a lot of more things to do to achieve whatever. So that's a reinvesting thing. I think it's, like you said, they can stop, they can have a good life, especially also their kids and their kids. They would not have to work at all, but they see the possibility to do further stuff, to do more good stuff. So why not investing their money? And that's making them, really lovely people.
Yeah. And also, this kind of speaks to me in that I sometimes tell people, okay, you have to get out of your consumer mindset. So, for example, sometimes with employees, they want everything to be like ready to consume. Like you're at a McDonald's, it's easy to eat the food. You don't have to have good teeth. You don't have to chew a lot. And like the Coke, the calories just flow into, and the milkshakes, right? Everything just flows into you. It's very easy to digest. And I think we're really being, I don't want to say trained, because that's maybe going a little bit too far, but life has gotten easy, right? We were just talking in the break about evolution and like what our bodies were actually created to do over 6 million years of evolution. And it was probably not eating for 2 days, right? And then finding some berries or some plants that were edible, or maybe catching an animal. And it surely wasn't going to McDonald's 2 to 3 times a day and barfing down all that food. And so I think it's very easy to be a consumer, watch TikToks all day long, have McDonald's deliver, right? But it's much more difficult to be a producer. And it's so inspiring to me to see people who really don't need it, but who are driven by a larger mission to like go all in on it. And especially if they like stay humble and keep a regular life, right? It would already be so impressive, but they have a kid, right? And not somebody they send off to some boarding school in Switzerland, right? And so I just, I think I'm gonna say it again. You can sense how impressed I am by them, but I think they are basically the best that Germany can offer. And I think people really ought to study how they came up, what they did, how they developed to be this way, and what they do on a daily basis. Just like with Elon Musk, I think we have a lot to learn from them.
Absolutely.
So they have become famous, and BioNtech has become famous because they developed the COVID vaccine. But actually, they are doing a little bit of different stuff, and we're not going to get too much into the details. They are fighting cancer. So the mission is literally to cure cancer. And I honestly feel a little bit dumb right now, because when we were talking about Tesla, I was saying, oh yeah, but Elon Musk has 2 grand visions, 2 grand missions. First, change the the energy system of the planet, right? And then also make humanity multi-planetary. And what could be another one, right? And then we were thinking, and those guys are, cure cancer, right?
Sure.
There you go. There's a big problem that needs to be solved, right? And they're on it. And we see the same pattern. And I think as the podcast progresses, I think we're going to see this pattern again, where people just take on these huge challenges. And like you said, they stay on target, right? They don't let anything deter them from getting there. They always change the methods. They always change the direction, but they don't let go of the goal. They seek a very big, juicy, hairy, important problem, and then they go after it like there's no tomorrow. And so they're not actually in the vaccine business when COVID hits. And vaccine development, so this is not, I think this is important for people to understand. It's not their business. They are working on something different. And it's actually quite difficult to develop vaccines, to produce them, to have them tested by the regulatory bodies. And they see this coming and change course to start producing a vaccine. And this is how they became famous. And I want to focus today on something specific that's hopefully useful for leaders and especially people in product or people who are trying to figure out how to find their way in life. And I want to ask you something, Pauline. So you're a surfer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So take me through like how you surf. So let's say you go out to surf, you go to the beach, you have your board. What happens next?
I get dressed in my wetsuit. It depends where I'm surfing on the weather. Like, is it cold? Is it warm ocean? And then I'm gonna get warm, do some pre-workout at the beach probably, and then I just grab my board, go in the ocean, and wait for a good wave. Sometimes it happens that there are no big waves coming, so I'm just like chilling on my board, tanning a little bit, but it depends on my wetsuit. But of course, so it could happen that I'm not even like surfing or 2 or 3 waves a day because like it depends on the current, whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, of course, like where you can expect some good waves or whatever. So you probably go to these destinations, but sometimes to just go with the flow. It sounds funny, but it's like that.
Mm-hmm. So if you're a beginner and you're surfing for the first time, can you describe like what's the experience of paddling out to where you want to catch the wave for the first time?
First of all, I have to be honest, it's super exhausting. It's super hard because like you barely stand. Most of the time you lay on your board. Even if you stand up, you are gonna fall like 100 times. And if you stand one wave, you're super happy. You feel like the best person, and like it's such a success and a good feeling. But then you fall down again, you swim out, you paddle out, and then you're exhausted. But it's a good feeling because you get better, and but especially for beginners, I think it's a challenge.
Mm-hmm. So I want to zoom in on that because if people don't have that experience of surfing, when they think of surfing, they see somebody riding in a tube, like a giant wave they've seen on YouTube. Is it like that?
Like, of course, you have big boards. Like when you start, you see those cool surfers not even wearing wetsuits because they don't need it. They're not like the wetsuits are because you're getting cold, but they don't need it because they're mostly out of the water, like riding their boards, and you were like laying there and looking at them and be just impressed. So that's exactly how I feel.
So first of all, right, so people think about surfing, okay, I see somebody riding in the tube or whatever, but it's actually not. You're saying it's difficult, but I would actually say, isn't it already very difficult? And I have very limited experience, but I have some. Isn't it already very difficult to just get out?
Yeah, it is. It's super, super hard. Yeah. I think once you're out, you're already like exhausted because it's hard to paddle against the current, whatever. And you're there watching them. It looks so easy especially if you're outside watching them. They're riding the waves, like it's the easiest thing. But once you're out on your board and you're not even like on your way back, it's super hard.
Yeah, so that was my experience as well. Like even if you're fit, just paddling out, it uses muscles that you don't usually use. and just paddling out once against the current, depending on the current, of course, is super draining. And you do it two or three times the first time you do it, and you got to be sore as hell for quite some time.
Not even the paddling thing. I think once you fall down, to get up on your board is also like hard. Like it's a mission, really. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, everyone has this image of surfing, but now we're hearing from somebody who's very good at it that it just like, especially in the beginning, just getting out there where you can like even look at waves and like try to catch one is quite exhausting, right? So let's say you've managed to do that. You're like sitting on the board. Everybody I think knows that picture. You're sitting on the board looking to the horizon for some waves. How do you know which wave to take?
It's hard to say. It's like you get a feeling after a while. I don't know, like it's just a feeling because you tried it 100 times probably before. So, and also a bit luck, It's both. But what do you think? You already did it too. So what's your?
Yeah. So the point I'm kind of trying to drive at is that, like when people observe other people have success in business, it always seems like an overnight wonder, right? It's like, okay, these guys were doing cure for cancer and now they pivoted and suddenly they are making dozens of billions in sales in COVID vaccines, right? Easy. They're doctors, they're professors, right?
Yeah. They don't see the hard work before, like, because nobody has them on, like, nobody's. I haven't heard from the BioNtech company. Like, I heard of them, but I never heard about the people behind. I was not interested because they were probably inventing something before, but nothing like that important for the whole population. So I haven't had them in my mind at all. That's exactly the thing. Like, to come back to the surfing spot, like you have a feeling which wave is good because you did it 100 times before. But when you see the surfers like riding the waves, you think they're pros, whatever, but you barely think about that they start the same level you did,
And so I'm trying to. So this week I talked to a young entrepreneur, right? And so he went to school, went to university, smart guy, and now he paid his dues, right? He has some work experience, he has some money put aside, he's having a good income job now, and he wants to do more. He has the ambition, right? And I just love that ambition. He has a family on the way, like a kid on the way has a family, and he's trying to go places, right? And good on him, really good on him. And he was asking, Gereon, should I do this? Can you tell me more about this? I want to do this, right? And I was like, And he talked about the other thing and said, well, do you think this would help? This would be really helpful, I think, in this regard, in that regard. And so like, And then he was like, I think he was getting a little bit frustrated with me. And I was like, I'm not trying to be negative, but, you came this far to get into a position where you can actually do something, right? You paid your dues on learning how to paddle out, right? You're sitting there looking at waves. And to me, what it looks like is that you want to take the first wave that comes along, right? And you're making a face. So what's wrong with taking the first wave that comes along?
It could work, but most of the times it won't. No. Yeah, I know what you're trying to say. It's like...
Yeah, and there's actually like two parts to this. So the first one is, so let's say the first wave is the right wave, right? You're going to fall down, right? Guaranteed, right? And this is what entrepreneurship is about, right? You always hear about the people on the news that tried it the first time and immediately were successful, like the Zamba brothers in Germany, for example, or somebody in the United States. They tried it the first time and immediately they were successful. But what you don't hear is that this is, first of all, this is not the rule. And often in these cases, there's some magic sauce to it. So maybe they grew up in a household that's entrepreneurial, right? And like everything they've heard from when they started talking was their parents talking about business, right? Or some other, I don't want to say cheat code, but something that gave them the leg up. And so, yes, you might catch that first wave and you might be able to ride it all the way down, right? You might, but that's not going to happen, honestly.
No, not realistically.
And so the lesson here is that you need to start catching waves to get your experience in.
And to fall down many times. Because because of that, you know how to get on the board, like how to get back, like the right moves, you know? So it's important to fail, I think, because otherwise you won't learn and you won't get a pro. Because maybe you'll be good, but you won't be a pro because you don't know how to react on different kind of, you know, conditions. So I think this is important too, to fail.
And so I've been in a beginner class. What do you think most people in a surfing beginner class do? Do you think they take this hard route and come back again and again?
No, absolutely not. Maybe they do, like they finished. I think most of the people don't even finish their class because they're super exhausted and they can't imagine themselves like being this pro guy, like riding the waves, looking good in it and like having fun, you know? They just see the pain, the suffer, the cold, whatever. So they just leave it like that.
Yeah, and I don't know the statistics, but I think people think it's fairly easy, right? They see people on YouTube or whatever, and then they try it and they're just completely shocked by, and I mean, for people who haven't done it, it doesn't matter if you're fit. It's extreme because you have the sun hitting you, you have the sand that is like rubbing your skin, the waves, the salt is like getting into the wounds. Your muscles are gonna be dead within minutes because you're fighting against the current because you don't know how to move against the current yet, right? Stop me at any point of time if I'm saying something wrong.
No, it's 100% right.
I mean, you now know it, but if you look at beginners, they don't know how to move, right? And then they get hit by the board when they fall off it, or it gets lost. And like in my experience, like you said, most people don't even finish the first session. They suddenly realize, wow, this is way more than I bargained for. It looks cool. I got that little video where somebody filmed me where I was like kneeing on the board or standing on the board on the beach for 2 seconds. I'm going to post that on Instagram and everywhere, but yeah, you weren't really surfing, right?
I'm really seeing you on the board.
Hey.
I'm really looking forward us both surfing somewhere.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about myself, but there I go, right? Making the same mistake. Okay, so this is the first thing, right? You have to get in the game and stay in the game, and that means a lot of pain, right? It means making a lot of mistakes, sticking with it, and it's not fun. You really have to have that mission in your head. You have to stay on target. But actually, it doesn't stop then, because let's say you are able to move out against the current and you're sitting on your board, right? And the wave comes in, the waves come in. So you said before that you have to have some experience in, like looking at the waves. So this means you have to catch a lot of waves. But even if you, let's say we are you in this situation, right? You have the experience. Do you take every wave?
No. First of all, you have the feeling like which waves you should not take. Some of them are too big, just too big, or too small, whatever. And yeah, some of them are just not good to take. I don't like. No.
Okay, and let's say you see a wave that you think works. What happens then? Like some people have never seen somebody do it. They have just maybe seen somebody actually standing on the board. You see a wave. What happens then?
I'll try to catch it.
Okay, and what does it mean specifically? How do you catch it?
Yeah, like first of all, like when you see technically, I paddle the way back, and then once it's a good position to jump on your boat or step on your boat, you try to catch it and try to stand.
Mm-hmm. So is it correct to say that when you see a wave that you think this is going to be it, you immediately start paddling like you?
No, like I'm still thinking about it. I'm still like not sure until it's closer and I really think, okay, I see it breaking already somewhere, and then it's worth to try it. That's because you know, like if you take the wrong one, you know, you already have in mind, okay, if I'm not standing this wave, I have to go back outside again. I have to, yeah, it's getting hard, it's painful because I just failed. And that's why you really have to, like, you really think it's a process. Should I try it? Should I risk it? And then once you decide to do it, you're in already. So if you decided to catch this wave, there's no way to, like,
To abort.
exactly.
Yeah. And see, this is why I think surfing is such a good metaphor for leaders and entrepreneurs, because it's the perfect metaphor. So first of all, you have to really pay your dues to even get in the game, right? It looks nice from the outside. Everybody wants to do it. Everybody wants to be a cool surfer. But actually just getting out there is a pain. It's really a pain. And so let's say you stuck with it. You catch the wrong wave. Like you said, you're going to be back on the beach. You look at the ocean and you're like, ugh, dang.
Yeah.
And then, right, so suddenly it becomes important to identify the good waves, right? Am I in a good position? Is this a wave that's neither too large nor too small? Is it something I can do? How many people are around me, right? Is it packed and I'm going to be run over by some pros who are going to beat me up on the beach afterwards because I got in their way, right?
It's a war.
It's war, right? And so I think this is exactly how product development, new ideas, entrepreneurship works. So first of all, you need to pay your dues, right? And if we think back to that young entrepreneur that I was referring to, he paid his dues, right? He went to university, got a relevant degree, has work experience, has the money to actually do something now, right? To invest. That means for me, he's out on the water. And in his mind, because he's ambitious, which is awesome, he wanted to get on the wave. I said, no, don't take that wave. And he said, well, but the other one. I said, no, don't take it. Don't take it. And he was like, yeah, but I'm here to surf. I paid my dues. I want to take the waves. But the thing is, I think what you need to do is you need to look to the horizon and see what kind of waves could be coming there, right? So right now, AI is the big hot topic, and there's going to be new ones. And then you just said, well, as it gets closer, right, the waves get closer. And I think this is exactly what you have to do. You have to keep watching them, keep watching them, keep watching them. Also the business ideas, say, okay, so this is nothing. I'm going to let it go. Or wait, this is actually something that could be really interesting. And then, and maybe this is just because I'm not as good as you, but for me, it really sticks in my mind that, and probably because I'm starting late and not positioned well, I have to start to paddle like a madman. And then the wave is still already past, and I'm like, what happened? Right? But this is what people do. They say, oh, right now, right? AI is very dominant in the public discourse, and people say, oh, I have to get on AI. I have to learn about it, right? Then we need to do something with AI, right? And some other people, like the pros, they've been doing it for 10 years. They're like, hey, guy, I'm already done with it. We're all set up. You can try to start to paddle as much as you want. It's already past.
Exactly.
Right? And so I think when you said it's really important to not commit to a wave that doesn't work out for you, right? I think this is really key, because if you're young and ambitious, you always tend to go with waves. And I guess that's something that you have to learn. But like often you commit to waves that don't really make sense, right? And maybe there's a way to like pay enough attention and maybe analyze the waves before, and maybe you can watch some training videos, maybe you can talk to some other surfers, so you don't have to ride all the useless waves back to the beach, right? Because there are people out there who are dedicated entrepreneurs, and they start a thing every 1 or 2 years, and all of them fail. And I mean, the question is, for how long can you actually take that, right? I mean, if you never get up on the board just for a second, and you're just like being washed out all the time, I mean, realistically, how long are you gonna stick with it?
Like we said, most of the people fail.
Yeah, and can I tell you something? Like the very first time I surfed in Australia, I rented a board, couldn't get up on it, super frustrated, didn't do it again. You know what? They didn't wax it. So for everyone, so you have to wax the board, because otherwise you won't have any grip. And if you're a beginner in Australia, you can have the perfect balance. You're not going to be able to keep up there. And it just killed me. And it was only years later, I was like, hold on a second. What's going on? All right. Yeah. And so I had that unfortunate first surfing experience of trying to surf with a board without an instructor and with no wax.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yep. And so, all right. So if surfing is a metaphor for business in general, and I think also in leadership, I think there's a couple of important things to discern, to take away from that. So the first one is always keep scanning the horizon, right? Because you want to see stuff as early as possible, but then you want to stick with it, like keep watching the waves to see which ones actually turn out to be something real, right? Something that could fit you, that you could run with. Because, if you try to compete with OpenAI right now, you won't have the resources, right? It's too big, or other things are too small to actually make a living out of it. And then when the wave is there, you're more experienced, so you'll probably position yourself correctly. For me, it means I have to start paddling, right? And you're laughing about it, but actually in the beginner's classes, this is what they say, right? They say, you got to start paddling. You got to start paddling. And guess what? Again, paddling is hard, especially if you went out against the current. And if you don't paddle quickly enough, you're going to miss the wave, right? If you're more experienced, you just get into the right position and you just catch it. But as a beginner, you have to paddle. And if you try to stand up, which fails a lot in the beginning, and then it's only then that you actually get a chance to surf.
Yeah, or like to stand a waves, like not even surfing, because I think in the beginning it's even like the best feeling to stay on the board and go out, not like making curves or whatever. Like you just like stand up and try to keep staying on top, so that's already a good feeling and you feel super happy.
Yeah. And so like when I started reading this book, I couldn't help but think of the surfing metaphor, because it's really interesting to listen how him, and let's say the names because we're always saying him and her. So him is Dr. I'm gonna try to pronounce the Turkish name in English, which I don't really how to know. It's Uğur Şahin. In my botched Turkish, I would say Uğur Şahin, and doctor, of course, and then his wife Özlem Türeci. Kind of difficult to pronounce. How would you pronounce them? Don't know. Pretty much. She just doesn't want to do it. I understand. So Özlem is the wife, and Uğur is the husband. And both researchers, both very accomplished. And so it's really interesting to see him react to the first news of the pandemic, right? So he is hearing about it. He's not quite like taking it all that serious yet, but he's still noticing it, right? He's always scanning the horizon for stuff to come. And then he stays watching very passively, right? It's not his field of expertise, right? He's not an epidemiologist. And as the wave comes closer, and some people in France first get COVID, and then somebody in Germany gets COVID, he stays on it and sees, okay, this could be something real, right? And then he starts to make some investigations. He makes some calculations, and he looks into the stuff, not his field of expertise, and says, wow, this could be a real problem. Because if I look at the math of how many people got infected by how many original sources of infection, this doesn't look good. People seem to be getting sick quite quickly. And also the symptoms don't show up until it's very late, right? So people can go around infecting other people without even knowing. And he makes his calculations on a weekend. And there's just so much interesting stuff on them. Okay, so first of all, if I'm reading this correctly, they have like a weekly setup where they seem to be working Monday through Thursday, and they seem to be working all the time, right? They went to the lab after the winning after all. But Friday, Saturday, Sundays are science days, right? So on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they withdraw back to the apartment and read scientific papers. And, also when we were talking about Reggie Love's biography, The Body Man of Obama, in another episode, I just love these little nuggets of wisdom to see how people, like successful people, structure their days. Because a lot of people will just work 5 days and then take 2 days off. A lot of people will just work 7 days because they think, I want to be an entrepreneur. I need to work all the time, hustle, right? And that might be a good choice. But here you see people who are extremely successful. Granted, they're scientists, but they're working probably very hard for 4 days. And then they're working very hard for 3 days, but in a totally different way, right? Reading papers, for example. And I've had a couple of years in my life where I did exactly that partition between the week. And I think back to it very fondly because it almost feels the 3 days over the long weekend, like researching stuff, almost doesn't feel like work, right? Because you can sit on a couch, you can read your papers, and you can maybe generate ideas, maybe work on some marketing stuff, just different than you do during the week. And so I just loved this idea of partitioning the week, 4 days maybe operational stuff, and then 3 days like recharging your batteries, relearning stuff to always stay on the cutting edge. Because if you think about it, if you wanted to stay current in AI right now, I don't think you could do it without reading a ton of papers. I mean, just on my Twitter feed is, this paper, right? And if you don't keep moving, you won't be able to keep up. The other thing that I find really interesting is that their daughter was a teenager at that point of time, and she says, well, we never talked about anything else than science at home. So, and they have some nice family rituals. And so he notices this wave coming in of COVID, right? And we probably all remember how, we first heard of it. Was something in Wuhan, never heard of that city before, and something coming closer. And then the authority is saying, it's not a big deal, right? And it's kind of funny to read it now in hindsight, right? And how the United Nations and the German health ministry, and they all said, it's not going to be a big deal. It's going to be over pretty soon. And he's like, well, yes, but something isn't right here. The data doesn't really make sense. I think this is going to be a big problem, right? And so he talks to his wife and convinces her because she says, well, this is his special skill to see patterns out there, right? And he has now used that, his superpower, and has found out a pattern. And so what happens then is really, really interesting. He sees there's a problem and he does a deep dive. And I've talked to this before, that I think it's really important. And again, credit to Gary V, on doing your 20 hours. So let's say we're that young entrepreneur, right? And we see a wave, a new opportunity, a new business, product idea, whatever coming in. I think what you need to do is you need to do your 20-hour deep dive on the topic. Meaning, you don't know anything about AI, you see it coming. Please take the 20 hours, take Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and try to immerse yourself in this and try to understand as much as possible in as short a time frame as possible. Because you wouldn't believe how many people out there say, I want to do something in this field. Yeah, and how much research have you done? Well, 0, but it's on my TikTok page, right? For you page. And it doesn't work like that. You have to invest the time. You have to kind of taste it. Like it's kind of like tapas, right? You have to take a little bit from everything to see what you like. But you have to take it. You have to try it. You can't say, I'm looking at it, or I've heard of it. You have to actually taste it to see what could make sense. And so the idea behind this, invest the 20 hours, and then you can either discard it because you see, this isn't for me. Maybe it's too difficult. Maybe it's too big, whatever. But if not, then you can take another step into it. Now, here's the thing where I think a lot of people are making a mistake. well, first of all, they don't do this deep dive at all, right? They just jump into that, and especially beginner entrepreneurs, they just take an idea and run with it. And they don't think about it. I've done this several times. They don't think about it, they don't learn enough, and they just run with it. And this is an expression of their spirit, right? It's cool. But as you get older, you don't do that anymore because it's super wasteful. And the other thing that I'm seeing is that people start this deep dive too late, right? And so they say, okay, I see the wave, but they never invest anything in analyzing it, right? And so they just, okay, so suddenly the wave is there, and they say, well, now I got to do the investigation, but it's already too late. The wave has already passed by. And so I would say do the investigation, do the deep dive, the 20 hours, and do it as early as possible. And this is exactly what he did, right? Because he had that structure of Friday, Saturday, Sunday, our science days, he was able, I think it was on a Thursday evening, to immediately do a deep dive into this. And on Sunday, probably even before, but at the latest on Sunday, he had his analysis. He had done this deep dive, and he figured out that, whoa, there's a problem here. And, especially if we talk about business agility and so on, people always think about the execution of stuff, about delivering a software, for example, but nobody ever thinks about this kind of stuff. Yes, they could have started to produce all kinds of stuff. They could have started producing masks probably, right? I mean, they were as close to producing masks as they were to producing vaccines, which is to say not at all. Totally different business, right? Or air filters, something like that. So you gotta do that investigation to see where you're going. Then, and I love these little pieces of information of how important and successful people do stuff. Because here is a paragraph on page 11 that talks about how he actually prepared an email to the manager, I guess the money manager, the finance manager of the owners of the company, or like the financiers of the company. And he writes the email telling them, I think I'm seeing something here. Warning, warning, danger, danger. This could be really big. We need some money. We need some backing to actually pull it off. And then he doesn't send the email because he's not quite certain, right? And he lets it sit. And I've done this so many times, right? It's an important email. It's for him. He wants to convince them. But then for whatever reason, fear, uncertainty, whatever, he's not sending the email. And I think that's so humane and so interesting to see. But at some point of time, he has the conviction, and he sends it out. It's really funny because like basically every page of the book is marked. At some point of time, I stopped putting in markers because it's just everything is so valuable. I actually think this book should be required reading in business school because there's so much to unpack here, so much valuable information on how to approach business and how to react and how to be agile, like on a very high level, that it should be required reading. The other thing that I found really noticeable is something that's called Price's Law. And Price's Law means that basically it's just the same couple of people who always produce much more than anyone else. So I think it was developed when looking at scientific papers. And so they were looking at who's actually writing the papers that are getting cited, who's writing a lot of important scientific papers. And it turned out that it was always the same couple of people, right? So if you have a scientific department in a university, I don't know, let's just make something up. You have 100 researchers. It's going to be like 3 or 4 that are going to do like a massive amount of research, and you're going to have a lot that won't produce anything or very little, right? And so actually this Price's Law is something that you can observe in a lot of places. And I found it really interesting that both of them have produced hundreds of patents, hundreds of academic papers, have founded non-profit organizations before, plural, and had established €2 billion businesses before actually starting BioNtech, right? And I think, there's always these comparisons to Tesla. If you apply to Tesla, They ask for one point, and I think they call it prodigious creator. They ask you, have you ever achieved anything noteworthy in your life, right? Have you created something? Have you invented something? Have you written something? Have you done anything that's exceptional? Because they know of this Price's Law, and they want to see if you're one of those people who has actually, done something cool or great, because the likelihood that you're going to do it again for them,
Yeah, of course.
is there. It's super smart, right? And of course, there's a limited amount of people who fit that profile, but I think it's very smart to be on the lookout for that. Do you actually remember that I asked you that question?
Yeah. I was literally thinking about that. Yeah, it's a smart question, actually. But in this moment, it hits different.
All right. So they talk a lot about their childhood, and I find it very interesting how they were formed by that. So, for example, for him, his aunt, if I read it correctly, died of cancer, and this set him when he was small, and this set him on the mission to cure cancer, right? And for her father was a physician, but because they were both immigrants from Turkey, he didn't really get to choose where they lived, right? And they put him somewhere where they really needed a doctor on the countryside. And so he had to do everything, and she was with him, right? And she watched her first appendectomy by her dad at the age of 6. So super, super bloody, right? But the crazy thing is, as you read it, you say, well, of course they're going to be successful. Of course, right? They're doing everything right. They're eating clean. Again, we had this topic with Obama, right? They're investing their time in the research. They have this mission, right? Cure cancer. They've been trained from a very early age. And there's actually a couple more connections to Obama. So getting up early, right? So it's famous that Obama's mom woke him up before school when he was in Malaysia, I think, to teach him, because she wasn't happy with the level of teaching that he got in school in Malaysia, right? And so she woke him up early, taught him for 1-2 hours, then he went off to school. Here we see something similar. Get up early, study a lot, parents go to work early, and you just see this discipline and also this ambition, right? Because the parents, especially that of Özlem, of her, they wanted her to be more successful, to become something better, which is quite funny, I think, if you're a surgeon.
The level's quite high.
Yeah, you came from Turkey to Germany, and they say, well, I want my daughter to be more successful. It's like, oh, okay, that's kind of a tall bar, but good on you. It seemed to have worked, but she made it, yeah, but really interesting, right? Well, they went on to study medicine and then also biological research. So of course they got their PhDs. They both teach at a university. And I think that's something maybe for the people who are not from Germany that's often overlooked, that I just want to get into for a second. So because of the Second World War, I think a lot of non-Germans have the impression that to Germans the military is very important, right? Because they see documentaries on the History Channel, which is also sometimes referred to as the Hitler Channel in the United States, because it just shows Second World War Germany all the time. No, but seriously, that's what people call it. And it's true that, Germany has a long military tradition, very, very long. But what most people, I think, don't get outside of Germany is that science is in such high regard in Germany that it trumps militarism or military ranks, etc., by far. So now, or even before, if you have a PhD in Germany, people are actually required by law to call you doctor, whatever, doctor and your last name. And people will actually insist on that, right? And they'll say, it's Dr. Miller to you, right? You're smiling, you've heard that before, right? But it's actually because it's held in such high esteem. And so people often have this military focus when they think of Germany, but it's actually the scientific achievement that counts most in society. If you have a professor, it's going to be everywhere. It's going to be on your letterbox. It's going to be, people are going to call you that, and they're not just going to say your first name usually unless you know them very well. It's enormously prestigious to be a professor. And these guys, kids of immigrants, both achieved that. And I think, her father would have been very proud if that was all she achieved, but then they again went on. And another similar thing to the Obamas is that they both met at work, right? So the Obamas met in a law practice, and she was actually his senior. And here it's the other way around, and they met at a blood cancer ward through work, and then they got to know each other and fell in love. You sound like you want to say something about it.
No, actually, it's quite romantic, and I really love it. Such a nice story.
Yeah.
And I think also I think even if they haven't met, I think they would have been successful with their studies or whatever. But I think especially because they fell in love, they were both motivating each other. So I think, yeah, it's the perfect marriage with the best outcome ever.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we can all be very happy to have them, right? Just like with Elon Musk, like I said, what if he stops doing his stuff, right? People are always so critical of him, and I get it. However, what if he stops and we don't make the energy transition and we don't get to Mars and so on? And what I find really interesting is that what united them is also that, yes, they are good scientists, and yes, they love science. I mean, to the point that the daughter is kind of jokingly complaining that science is all they ever talk about at home, is that they are actually frustrated with the difference of the scientific level and the practice in the hospital, right? Because they were seeing the cutting edge of science and we're seeing, okay, we're very far ahead, but what we do at the hospital is way behind, right? And this was kind of what they wanted to do. They wanted to close the gap and bring more modern science into the practice of medicine. And I think, especially if you talk about Germany, this is a big issue for the whole country, because if you think about basic research, the foundational research, Germany is a superpower in it. Germany is extremely good at it, but Germany is terrible at commercializing science, right? And so I think the most famous example is maybe not the best one, but a very famous example is the MP3, right? The file format. Germany invented the technology. I think it was the Fraunhofer Institute, but it wasn't popularized here. I think the Walkman, same thing, right? Invented here, then popularized in Japan. And if you looked it up on the internet, you could find a ton of stuff, because Germany is actually quite good at the research, but then transferring that into something real, into a product that works, into commercial success, very few people can actually do that. And this is important, because otherwise, who's going to fund the basic research over the long term, right? And so here you can really see what Renaissance man and woman they are, right? And they're not just good scientists, they're not just good doctors, they're not just good entrepreneurs, they're excelling in everything across the board. So what is interesting, right? Going back to the surfing, they tell the story about how they basically tried all the different methods, right? So they paid their dues. They tried all the different kind of waves. They tried all the different surf spots and learned and figured out which one works and which one doesn't. And then they settled on one and said, okay, so this is our technology, the now famous mRNA technology. But they wanted to do it for cancer, for fighting cancer. And there are a couple of interesting anecdotes here. For example, how they met Bill Gates in Germany, and he wanted a briefing beforehand. He read the briefing before and was actually able to talk to them on a very high level, right? Super smart guy. And he was actually the one, before they ever thought about this in 2018, so quite a while back. He said, well, why don't you use it against pandemics, right? And back then, of course, very few people were thinking about pandemics at all. All right. And so the book builds kind of like a, one of those movies or TV shows where you can sense the collapse coming, right? You feel like, okay, there's something there. Okay, it's getting darker. It's getting darker. It's actually quite riveting, right? And he's way ahead of everyone because at this point of time, no one really sees that there's a problem in the West. And now he's made the jump, right? He said, okay, I've been watching this wave. It's coming closer. It's coming closer. And actually, this is going to be the real one. And not the real one in the sense of I want to make a commercially successful product, but in the sense of first, we want to help people. And secondly, to protect their own company. Because they were doing the math and they were figuring out, well, if we're fighting cancer, and by the way, we don't have that much money in the bank anymore, we need to be successful, right? We are finally at the cusp of a breakthrough. If suddenly our people die, our people cannot get to work, we're not going to be able to achieve our goals, right? So actually, this is almost like an act of self-defense to protect the company if we at all are able to do something about it. So then he does another deep dive, right? Not just on the likelihood of something bad happening, but like really trying to understand coronaviruses. It's not his field, right? And it's mainly him at this point. And now she starts to get in, Özlem, right? And she starts to put together a team. And what really strikes me here is a concept that I really love, and it's called violence of action. It's quite hard to find like a definition of it, but it basically says, so it comes from the military sphere, and it basically says, well, if you have to do something, like hurt somebody, then do it with as much explosive force as possible. So think about it. You're walking around alone in the street. You are being held at gunpoint, and you know something really bad is going to happen, right? You're going to be raped. You're going to be killed, and you come to the conclusion, okay, this is not just like a robbery. They're not just going to take my wallet and take off. Something really bad is going to happen. And you come to the conclusion, I have to fight back now. How do you do it? Like, do you start very softly? Do you start to like shove the person? You're already shaking your head. Exactly. You go out in full violence, use surprise, you don't let up, and you just finish the enemy as quickly and as harshly as possible, right? Without overstepping any bounds as far as legal self-defense is concerned, of course. But you don't play around, right? You didn't get into that position. You really fear for your life, and so you go crazy. Violence of action.
I remember what you said, like first punch must kill.
First punch must kill. Yeah, sounds crazy. The first time I heard, I was like, Jesus, what's going on here? What are those guys talking about? But if you are in that situation, you don't start the fight. But if you're in that situation, don't play around. Don't shove them. Don't like make them see what you can do. If you're in a position to have to fight for your life, use violence of action and just go crazy. And this is what they're doing, right? The whole execution, it's so violent, it's so aggressive in a very positive sense, right? They see the problem and they immediately shift course. He starts to do the first deep dive on seeing if it's real. Okay, then he talks to the financiers, and then he does the second deep dive, right? They assemble a team, and it's just like, it's in a matter of days, right? And if you think about the normal course of business in, let's say, a French corporation or an Italian corporation, they couldn't even do this in a year, and they do it within days, right? Because they have the smarts, they have paid their dues, and they're ready to go, and they're making that decision and executing on it. And this is what really makes the difference. And also, if you think about it from a business perspective, what if you have to compete with people like that? And this is always what I tell people, like, what if you have to compete against Tesla people? Well, good luck with your dithering. Oh, I got a great story for that. So there was an article recently in the Handelsblatt, the German business newspaper, and they were talking about how the Chinese car companies are eating the lunch of the German car companies. So it used to be that German car companies were very dominant. I remember when I was in China a long time ago, like basically every car was an Audi, like an older model Audi, not like the most current model, but you barely would see anything else than an Audi. And now there are some Chinese car companies that most Westerners haven't heard of, such as BYD, who are actually quite good, who are like even able to compete with Tesla, right? And so what did this article say? Well, whenever there is a request by customers, the German companies can't deliver, even though it shouldn't be difficult. And the example they gave is that apparently some Chinese citizens want to take a nap in the car, right? During lunch break or whenever, they want to go to their car and take a nap in there. And so they asked the customers, well, what do you need for that? And they said a couple of things. So first of all, the seat has to recline. Maybe I can tint the windows so it's darker. Maybe I can set an alarm, right? And they listed a couple of things. And then BYD said, well, if I look at these different components of that request, it's nothing revolutionary, right? Make the seat recline, an alarm clock in a digital car. There's no big deal. But when the German car companies heard of this, it took them months of deliberating, going to committees, talking back to Germany, and then saying, oh, no, we can't do that, and blah, 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 the usual stuff, right? And so they don't implement it. Or they implement it after a year, while the Chinese car companies will just do it immediately, like Tesla style, right? Tesla speed. And so I think people always underestimate this. This violence of action, this speed of execution is absolutely critical, because otherwise you're going to be lost. And I think it was okay in the 60s, but there's not only Tesla anymore. There's so many companies who are hyper agile and very aggressive and move at this quick pace, and the time to be slow is gone.
Yeah, once you are successful, it's like Tesla, like he's successful, but he's continuously moving on, achieves new goals, whatever, and doesn't settle, like doesn't rest. Like for example, a German company, like car selling companies, or like Audi, whatever, like they've been really successful, and like multiple countries are talking about like the good quality of German cars and power and engine, whatever, but it's been in the past, and they sleeping still, so that's not it.
Yeah, and I think most European countries are just as bad, if not worse. And so I actually think, and this has been a spiel of mine lately, I actually think that we're at a point that is even worse than what we've just been talking about, in that I often have to do with people from German car companies, and they're all, without fault, they're all super smart. They're all very well trained, right? These guys aren't idiots. They're like very professional, very smart, very good in what they do. However, it's my impression that they don't even understand anymore what's going on. Like if you stand somewhere, you can only see so far. At some point of time, you're not going to be able to see. Even if you're standing on flat countryside, you can see a couple of 100 meters maybe, right? And the problem is they're so far behind that even if they can see 500 meters into the future, Tesla has already passed that. And so they don't see what's going on anymore, because there's like a lot of famous anecdotes around this. So there's a quite popular TV personality, and he was talking to some of the managers, and they said, you know what? We can actually build the cars better than Tesla. We can bend the metal better. We can build this better. We can build that better. And I think this is probably true. And then they go on to say, the thing that we cannot do is the software. Right? And so it's quite famous that the German car companies have a lot of software problems. And now they're getting a lot of the software from Google, for example. But to me, this says they still don't understand what's going on. Because what's really going on is, and Elon Musk has said this publicly, the factory is the product. The process, the hyper agility is the product. And yet they're still looking at a component of the car and saying, oh, we don't do software so well. Yeah, that's right. And it's probably also right that you bend the metal better, that you the production quality is higher. However, Tesla is able to adapt their cars overnight, right? So if they say, oh, we want to change something in this car, and this will sound crazy to people who are not familiar with this, but they're saying, well, hardware is just software anyway, right? And so they've built their factories in a way that if they make a change to the car, hardware, they have a build server run, and the next morning, the new piece of equipment, the differently built Tesla car will roll off the factory floor. And if you think about what that means for regulatory approval, this is pure madness. This is absolutely crazy. And I understand that it's hard to understand it. It's mind-boggling. But this is not new for Tesla. This is not, oh, we've just done this last week. This is kind of old news for them. They are already way past. Meanwhile, the German car company is still saying, oh, software is the problem. No, software isn't the problem. And it's not even that your factories aren't there. The problem is that you don't even understand what's going on anymore. And this is the moment you get disrupted and everything breaks apart. And so you see here the utter violence of action that they're doing, because at this point of time, he has done the first deep dive, he's done the second deep dive, she has assembled a team, they've talked to their financiers, there wasn't one single case of COVID in Germany, and they are already ready to go.
Yeah.
And I mean, I get goosebumps thinking about it. Thankfully, somebody was keeping an eye out and getting prepared. And of course, a lot of times you think the wave is coming, you start to position yourself. I would start to pedal, and it's not the wave.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You have a false start. That's normal.
I mean, in the beginning, or I think still, but in the beginning, they had other intentions, like they want to beat cancer. So it was not in their mind to find something against any pandemic. So they just changed their course because everything was given and they just risked it. And luckily, they found something.
Yeah. And so the funny thing to me as an agile coach is how agile they are without seemingly doing Scrum, for example, or Kanban. They're agile, right? Like everything, how they think, how they act is super agile. And so another really funny thing is, to me at least, well, maybe it's a nerdy thing, but it's quite well known that at Tesla, there's at least in some factories a configuration where Elon Musk will have a glass office in the middle of the factory, or some engineers like inside of a large building, right? And so he can look out and see how everyone's working, and they can see him, right? It's not about, he doesn't want to tell the person, oh, you have to lift this a certain different way, or you're not doing enough pieces, right? It's about transparencies, being in the flow. And in Agile, we have this Japanese term of Gemba, like being where the action is, like if you were a general, not be removed from the action, but being very close to the front line to actually get a feeling for what's going on, right? And so Elon Musk is famous for doing that by sitting in his glass cubicle or glass office in the middle of the production. And they were actually doing the same thing, right? Because the leader, the general, needs to be close to the action. And so he's doing it as well. And what I found a little bit funny too is that over Christmas break, Uğur was always reading stuff, always coming up with new ideas for products, for projects. And like all the employees knew that, okay, come January, he's going to come with this new stupid idea. And I was thinking, I noted it down, unlike Teamflow, our company, right? I never come with stupid ideas that then don't pan out, right? But this is actually, right, of course, shouldn't come with stupid ideas. That's a given. But this is kind of the way, right? That's kind of like, okay, I'm going to pre-position myself for the wave. I'm going to start to paddle for the wave. And then I noticed, it's not the right one. It's bad, but it's better, like you said before, than riding out the bad wave, being back on the beach and having to paddle out all the way again, right? Better abort early. Ideally, you wouldn't need to abort at all, but yeah. Yeah, but that made me smile a little bit. And, just, we call it organizational refactoring, just rearranging the organization. So once they have taken on that challenge, talk to their management board, so their top managers, the C-level positions, and got everyone's buy-in to rearrange the organization, right? To pull in different teams to work on stuff. And if you think about like a traditional corporation, how easy is it to get some people to work on stuff? Not really, because then their managers will say, oh yeah, but you can't have them, they are mine people, and so on. And
it's a nightmare.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. And so this is basically on the day that Germany has the first case. It's 4 months before President Trump starts their operation, what was it called, Warp Speed, right? So it's like way ahead of everyone else. And they've basically pre-positioned themselves to do the initial investment, to find out more, to start to become a vaccine company, which they weren't at this point. And what I also found really interesting is that the management board actually wasn't quite convinced, right? And they said, well, we're not quite convinced. We don't think this is real. Because, if you think back to SARS and MERS, right, they popped up and then they died off again. And you don't want to bet the whole company on building a vaccine, which is not your specialty, if the disease is gone in a week, right? And then you don't need to do it. It's just a waste of time. But they said, well, okay, so first of all, we trust him. And also, let's do it incrementally, like the MVP, minimum viable product approach, right? So you don't commit to build the whole thing out. You say, okay, let's take some money, let's take some energy, put it in there, get to a certain level, and then reassess. So like everything they do is highly agile, very smart, very much exhibiting violence of action. And then what did they do next? Something we do in Scrum all the time. They had a roles and responsibilities workshop where the top management said, okay, you're going to do this, I'm going to do this, who's going to do that? And so like they partitioned who was doing what. And the great thing, especially from a Scrum at Scale perspective, is that Uğur, he had the following responsibility: eliminating idle periods. So his job was to make sure nobody would be waiting around, waiting for something, right? And this is so Scrum, it's almost impossible to bear. This is like the core of Scrum at Scale. So first of all, the boss is making sure problems, impediments are being removed, right? And then also looking to see where stuff waiting, where stuff not flowing correctly, and trying to remove these impediments at the highest level. And I want to tell a quick anecdote about Dr. Sutherland, who co-created Scrum and invented Scrum at Scale. And so I regularly teach at a leading European business school, like agile methods. And when I teach Scrum, I sometimes ask Dr. Sutherland to join for an hour to talk to the students there. And usually he asks me, so what would you like me to talk on? Is there anything specific? And I always say, well, I think Germany is falling behind. I think it would be good if we could rile them up a little bit, right? And so he does that. He knows exactly how to speak their language. And the funny thing that I always take away from that is he doesn't say become a Scrum Master, which is one of the roles in Scrum. He doesn't say become an Agile coach. So helping organizations transform from a non-agile way of working to a more modern agile way of working. He says, identify the companies that are agile because they're going to be successful, and then either invest in them, such as Tesla back then, right? And a lot of people in the agile space have become very rich by investing Tesla because they've recognized, wow, they are hyper agile and they are going to be successful. Or start to work for them and get stock options. And there's a lot of case studies. Or found an agile company because you're going to beat out the competition if you behave in an agile way. And so we're on page 41 right now. If I stop here, I already know that they're going to succeed. Because, I mean, honestly, who's going to stop people that are this dedicated, this smart, that are doing everything right? Of course, they can have bad luck, right? Where the models they try, the molecules they try, they don't work out. That can happen.
Of course. Even if it's the perfect wave and you try to catch it, you get a cramp or whatever, like something can happen easily, but then when everything else is perfectly set up, you try the next one and you probably make it,
Yeah. And so I find this to be so amazing, right? Because you can see what they're doing, what they're thinking. And of course, it's going to be successful. And Jeff is right. You should invest there. You should go there and work there. This is much better than being get stock options there. That's much better than working in a big faceless corporation that is slowly going down the drain.
Of course.
And I think this is one of the last points we're going to make today on BioNtech. What I really liked also is, on one hand, they are crazy ambitious and courageous, just like when we were talking about Elon the other day. But also they know their weaknesses and what they are good at and what they're not good at. And this is very early on, they were thinking about what was required to become a vaccine company. And if they wanted to move fast, which was very critical to them, they knew they had to get a partner, which was Pfizer, of course, right? And the reason why Uğur wanted to be fast is because he was thinking in days without vaccine, because there were some studies done on the swine flu in the United States where a vaccine was developed, and they figured out that if the vaccine had been available just like a really short amount of time, like 2 weeks earlier, they could have saved a lot of people from dying from it, like really like a disproportionate number, right? And so he was like always having this pressure to go fast, because he knew if you have this exponential growth, if you wait too long, you're really going to be in a lot of trouble. And literally every day counts. And so having somebody like Pfizer as a partner would be necessary in order to actually get to that speed. And there's a lot of interesting anecdotes and aspects in here, because imagine the situation, right? Nobody's really aware of the problem yet. And you have come to the conclusion, Houston, we have a problem, right? But nobody else is seeing it, because the first case in Germany has just happened. And if I remember correctly, there wasn't a case in the United States until much later, right? So everybody's still asleep at the wheel, and he has the conviction it's happening and we have to move as quickly as possible. Put yourself into that situation. Like, how do you talk to people? Do you go crazy and they say, what is he talking about? Or are you taking it slow? And this is actually, I really resonated with that, because this is how it feels to be an agile coach. If you notice, okay, the organization that I'm trying to help, they are in trouble, but nobody's seeing it, right? They're seeing it enough to have an agile coach, but they don't see the urgency. And you know the urgency because you know how agile companies that are competitors behave, and you know what's going to happen to them. And yeah, that was really interesting. And they always reference a story, and this is where the good writing comes in of the author, is that he had this situation as a kid with his father, who would try to repair old radios and would always fail, never listen to him. And he tried to help his dad, and the dad would never listen and would always get angry. But this guy's a genius, right? So he knew the solution. And so at some point of time, he figured out, okay, his father has to come to the conclusion himself. I can say whatever I want. I need to give him the space. And then he comes to the conclusion, and then I can help him, right? And this is always being referenced. But I can feel so much for him. He's thinking, okay, every day we're late, people are going to die, yet no one else is even seeing the problem. That must have been really, really tough. All right. And I think this is it for today. I think we've been talking quite a while. I think we're going to come back to BioNtech again and again, because it's not just such a good story, but also, of course, it's very special to me because they are from Germany. And despite all the bureaucracy that we have here, everything that's slowing us down, they're actually showing how you can still win, right? Of course, they are a very tough act to follow, right?
Yeah.
But it still seems possible. And so I think they represent the best of us, right? Good scientists that dedicate their life to helping others while still like maintaining a family and so on. And so, yeah.
Definitely a big motivation for everybody.
So everyone, very good book. So if you're interested in reading more, it's in English and German. Joe Miller. It's called The Vaccine, and in German it's called Projekt Lightspeed. All right, that's it for today. Thank you guys for joining us. If you like this podcast, give us a thumbs up if that's possible on the platform that you're watching or listening to us in. Subscribe if you want to learn more, maybe some more about BioNtech at a later point of time. And thank you from Pauline and Gereon from Berlin, and see you another time. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye.